Welcome back to another Stand on Guard. This is our first Friday question period. We'll be back in 10 minutes to start things.
So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need a political change, but we also need the resolve to resist.
Hi, thanks for watching our live stream. I'm the host, David Krayden. I'll be back in about 10 minutes with the show. In the meantime, have a look at some of these clips and take the opportunity, please, to like this broadcast, ring the bell, or subscribe.
And we're stepping up in every way we can because we know that Russia must win this war. That Ukraine must win this war against Russia.
Go down the list of things that Justin Trudeau disapproves of, and you can imagine all of the things that will be criminalized. That someone who spent the first half of his adult life as a practicing racist, who dressed up in hideous racist costumes so many times he says he can't remember them all, should then be the arbiter on what constitutes hate.
I did not call people who were unvaccinated names.
The Prime Minister lied and his minions continue to lie about you for everything you did. Thank you to put your life on the line for us. You're one of the greatest women I ever met in my life.
A lot of people would say that you're simply taking a page out of the Donald Trump book.
Like which people would say that?
Well, I'm sure a great many Canadians, but...
Like who?
I don't know who, but...
We feel, because you all will have implants, and we measure your brain waves, and I can immediately tell you how the people react, or I can feel how the people react to your answers.
Oh, no, Mr. Bond. I expect you to be chipped.
I'm a liberal and a proud socialist, Mr. Speaker.
This is a Manchurian candidate. For people who don't understand the expression, and I'm not talking about the movie, I'm referring to somebody who can be used as a useful idiot by another country to come out and spout these things off. He is a Marxist.
End your silence. Speak up. For God's sake, stop complying. Start rebelling. They're out to get you if you do not resist.
Good buddy, mercy sakes alive. Looks like we got us a convoy.
Canadian country singer Paul Brandt here. I've been listening with my wife and 2 kids, and we want to say thank you for all you're doing in defense of civil liberties and freedom.
I'll ask the question I posed to you at the start of my round. Will you apologize on behalf of the government for this outrageous invite?
And
stand by the invitation.
Of course, what I said in my initial.
You have no shame.
What? Oh my heavens!
There is nothing they fear like the crystal clear sound of someone somewhere telling the truth.
So it will be a world integrating the physical, biological, and the digital dimensions. So it will be a new world.
Stop giving them the benefit of the doubt. Because I can tell you, you cannot comply your way out of a tyranny.
Out of war, a few people make huge fortunes. I would say it's plain to see that the racket has been going from strength to strength ever since. In his farewell address to the American people in 1961, outgoing President and old soldier Dwight D. Eisenhower warned about the threat posed by what he was already able to identify as the military-industrial complex.
These are all small countries today. They're much like the Greek city-states in the age of the Roman Empire. We're a sort of declining Rome at this point. I hope Americans will figure that out and act against it, but we're a declining Rome. The European states are like the little Greek city-states that were entirely dependent upon Roman military power to save them from the Macedonians. This whole business is a sham. NATO is probably not going to survive.
from the Public Health Agency of Canada did not have the science to support this policy. So the government initiated a study with a guy named David Fisman at the University of Toronto. And this study was so bad, Madam Speaker, that there's a book called Fisman's Fraud, The Rise of Canadian Hate Science. And I just want to know, how much money did they spend on these studies to support this Arrive scam when they knew that they didn't have the science to even support it from day one?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Madam Speaker, the mega conservative far right is coming out. These are the anti, these are the ones that still deny the pandemic. And at the end of the day, thank goodness it was that Canadians and the majority of the people in the House saw the value of protecting the health and well-being of Canadians, and that the far right was marginalized back then, Madam Speaker, because as a direct result, more people are living today.
When did you and your government start to become so afraid of your own citizens?
The Online Harms Act. You heard about it? Well, I've got some bad news for you. It is aimed at your free speech.
Thank God for truckers.
They are so terrified that we, the people, may make what they think is the wrong choice. That in the name of protecting democracy and saving us from ourselves, they're actually destroying our democracy and taking away our freedom.
This is the worst assault on freedom of expression ever in Canadian history.
Donc le but, c'était de faire une pression économique, empêcher de faire.
So the goal was to put economic pressure on these people to stop them from buying groceries, paying into their health insurance, and get them out of the streets.
Not the characterization that I would put on it. The objective was to ensure that those who were funding the continued illegal blockade of this and other cities were no longer able to do so.
Okay. Donc, vous n'avez pas répondu à ma question.
So you didn't answer my first question. In which other democratic country is it possible to do that?
Democratically passed legislation in this country pursuant to the Emergencies Act in Canada.
Okay, donc vous avez fait le droit, là. Vous vous êtes inspiré de la Corée du Nord?
So what, were you inspired by North Korea for this?
No. I'm not going to respond to that type of question, Madam Chair.
No, mais...
He's calling them domestic terrorists and wants to freeze their bank accounts. This has been absolutely outrageous. And everybody now is starting to agree that Justin Trudeau has lost this fight.
There will be consequences.
Justin Trudeau, though, this week said something I hated, which he called out. He said, the world we're starting to see the rise, the growth of authoritarianism and totalitarianism and dictatorships. And I couldn't believe that he said this with a straight face. Listen.
In all of our democracies, in every democracy around the world, we are seeing a rising movements of either authoritarian populism or skepticism about democracy itself. And we all need to recommit ourselves to standing up, not just for Ukraine, but through standing up for Ukraine, to the very principles that make our countries strong and free.
So Justin Trudeau says these comments almost, he says them with a straight face, as if he doesn't realize what's happening in his own country,
we could have
being
a
led
discussion
by him
about
to
the
clamp down on freedoms, the authoritarianism that he is presiding over in Canada.
Biden mourned Navalny's death. Even in prison, he was a powerful voice for the truth, he said. An interesting statement while journalist Julian Assange, who published Truth Inconvenient to the US and the West, presently rots in Belmarsh prison as he fights extradition to the US. I'm not yet aware of Biden mentioning, far less lamenting, the death in a Ukrainian prison
Mr. Chair.
of US citizen and writer Gonzalo Lira, who was critical of the Zelensky regime.
Carbon tax hike
Biden's administration has sought determinedly to jail his and their strongest and most popular opponent, Donald Trump. And yet, in the immediate aftermath of Navalny's death, Biden highlighted Vladimir Putin's desperate attempts to stamp out the opposition. Zelensky, propped up only by Western cash, has crushed his own political opponents as well. The pattern seems clear. bleat about enemies threatening democracy while simultaneously and blatantly and hypocritically seeking to trample on democracy at home, or turn a blind eye to the same being carried out by allies, or make that business partners.
Well, hello, folks. We're just trying to get hooked up in the question period. We had a catastrophic internet failure there, so I am just trying to get back on the stream here. And I'm not sure why. Let's try to get question period up here. Yes, okay. Bear with me here. There we go. Okay. Working on the fly here, so we're why am I not hearing it? I'm not hearing it.
His community.
There we go.
Appreciated by all who knew
Success.
him. He was a loving husband, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather.
Okay, we have
Everyone
a
who
few
met Russell was
minutes before
struck by his decency, humility.
the question starts. Thanks for joining me today. This was a bit of an experiment because I never do Fridays. And you can see why. I tend not to do Friday question period because there's not as many people there, and there's always issues on Friday. But thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. I just want to do a quick recap of what happened last night. And I think we've got just enough time to do that. Here, let's watch this clip here. I think this says it all.
Today, I look at the newspaper headlines. Even the media is noticing how bad things are. A headline in the National Post, and I quote, "Secret RCMP report warns Canadians may revolt once they realize how broke they are." The RCMP has produced a report saying that Canadians are so poor, desperate, and miserable that it may lead to political instability and other turbulence that you could not even have imagined would occur in a first world country 8 years ago. And in the middle of all of this, what does the NDP and this Prime Minister choose? To raise taxes. Raise taxes on food and fuel, on heat and homes. We rise today to vote non-confidence in this NDP Liberal government and to restore the great country that we love based on the common sense of the common people united for our common home.
Point of order, the Honourable Government Deputy House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition said that everything I said was not true. I'm wondering if he would step outside where he doesn't have parliamentary privilege.
I'm sorry, this is a point of debate.
If you work for a living, you have to show up. So will he show up?
Showing up for work means showing up for the people you work for. And I have to say, I've been more in his riding in the last 2 years than he has. I've been on the ground in Timmins, and they say in Timmins, they say he should be in the witness protection program. He doesn't live in his riding. He's never in his riding. He's forgotten about the miners and the forestry workers and the farmers. He's voted to raise their taxes, to raise tax on their home heating, so that the people in coal, Northern Ontario, have to suffer in the cold and pay higher taxes. And now he's going to vote for his master, the Prime Minister of Canada, rather than the people in Timmins. I will fight for the people of Timmins, here, everywhere, and always. Yeah.
So that was Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre talking about NDP member Charlie Angus, who he says should be a candidate for the witness protection program because he's never in his riding. He's just never there. Now, it's true, Pierre Poilievre was not at the vote last night. He voted electronically, like half of the people did last night. I've never seen this before. So many people not showing up for non-confidence vote and voting electronically. This is obviously a hangover from the COVID era. I think Pierre should have been there last night, and I'm not going to apologize for him. I think he should have been there. It just he invested a whole lot into this non-confidence vote. I think he realized it wasn't going to go ahead because of the NDP, but I think he should have been there last night. So clearly the Conservatives lost because the Socialists and the Separatists both joined with the Liberals to defeat this non-confidence motion. Now, I think this is a sad reflection of how we as Canadians are trapped with this minority Liberal government that has somehow managed to co-opt the Separatists now, along with the NDP, the Socialists, to stay in power. And what is it going to take to break this flimsy, loose coalition of the unwilling? I don't know. This is an evil confederacy. This is an unholy alliance that is keeping Justin Trudeau in power. Justin Trudeau wasn't even there last night either. But the point is, Justin Trudeau knows he would be defeated in an election if it were called right now. And the NDP and the Socialists love this carbon tax. And you saw that last night. So I am personally just completely not surprised. Not surprised, but I'm demoralized to the extent that I don't know how we are going to bring this government down when it continues to get the loyalty of these separatists and these socialists. And I think that's a major point for me. So my apologies again for the technical difficulty. My internet just collapsed as I was showing you that preamble. Thankfully, we got back in. But sometimes I wonder if we're being targeted here. I don't know, because the internet service can be very bad at the best of times, but never that bad. So I had to laugh at his exchange with Charlie Angus, because Charlie Angus, of course, is the lunatic who's in the private members bill that would make it illegal to say anything good about fossil fuels. So I'm going to go to question period here rather shortly. So we'll see what happens today. Like I say, Friday, everybody's on their way home. That's why they have it early, because by noon, there's nobody on Parliament Hill. They've all gone, and the staffers have all gone down to Spark Street to drink. And that's so it's a ghost town Friday afternoon. But sometimes things happen on Friday, and we're not going to be doing this for another 2 weeks. Do you realize that? 2-week break for these guys waiting for question period. We really didn't get enough done in terms of the nation's business last week. We needed more on ArriveCan. We needed more on the Chinese spies. But that did not happen, and I think that needs to happen. So we're going to go join question period now. Thank you again for watching.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. After 8 years of NDP Liberal inflationary spending and taxes, Canadians are struggling. The NDP, Liberals and Bloc had a chance to listen to their constituents. The 70% of Canadians who oppose the April 1st tax hike and 70% of provincial premiers who have asked the Prime Minister to stop his painful increase before it's too late. But they failed to hear from the food banks that are expecting to see 1 million more people use their facilities on top of last year's record high, and a third of food banks who will have to turn hungry Canadians away. They fail to hear from the families who have to make gut-wrenching decisions between buying food, heating their homes, or other life necessities. Thanks to the NDP and Bloc, the Liberals are still set to hike the carbon tax by 23% on April 1st, driving up the cost of everything. Canadians have lost faith in this government. Only common sense conservatives will axe the tax and bring home lower prices for everyone.
The honourable member for Windsor-Tecumseh.
Madam Speaker, last Thursday I joined local Unifor presidents Dave Cassidy and John Dagnolo to welcome the Prime Minister of Canada to Windsor and to our local Union Hall. Well over 100 workers and retirees welcomed the Prime Minister and heard him talk about the new partnership with Labour by delivering on our battery plant and 2,500 good-paying jobs. By delivering policies unions have long sought, like dental care, childcare, pharmacare, like 10 days paid sick leave and a ban on replacement workers. Unions built the middle class, Madam Speaker, and the fight continues.
Yeah, I see a comment here about the budget is coming up for a vote. Yes, the budget is coming up with a vote, and that's a confidence measure. But the NDP got what they wanted. They are in this to take as much as they can from this alliance, and they got what they wanted. They will support the government on this. So whether or not the Bloc decides to be difficult or not, we're not going to defeat the government in this next vote. You know, it's funny too. I put the sound on in a minute. It's funny the NDP got from the budget exactly what the Democrats under Joe Biden are selling in the States for the 2024 election, which is cheap insulin, cheap diabetes drug. I mean, is that really what this is about? I mean, we all know that diabetes is a lifestyle disease, and to think that we're going to somehow make this better, really better, by just giving people drugs. I mean, it amazes me. They really don't want to tackle the real problem here.
The Honourable Member for Drummond. Madam Speaker, we hear a lot about the importance of protecting and promoting Quebec songwriting, but it takes a lot more than words. It also takes music, of course, but also we need people who ensure to take action to protect songwriting, like Véronique Cloutier and the whole team at Rouge FM, who decided that their hit show, Véronique and the Fantastique, will now become 100% francophone. Only French music during this premier drive home show. It's a really strong signal sent to the public and the competition. So I'd like to thank Véronique Cloutier. Thank you for standing up for Quebec songwriting.
It's so funny. The Bloc always celebrates anything that's unilingual.
A clear message that at this time, a very difficult time for the music industry,
and that's okay for them. That's okay. Quebec can be unilingual.
That we can create hit shows with very diverse programming, thanks to all of our talent. Thank you.
As I've said many times, I have little time for the Bloc. I don't know what the hell they're doing sitting in the House of Commons.
Do you know the most common question I get in any community that I represent? It's not, what are you going to do about this policy or that policy? It's, when can we have an election? It's because after 8 years, Canadians know that this Prime Minister is simply not worth the cost. But last night, the Liberal NDP Bloc coalition instead abandoned their constituents and decided to prop up this historically unpopular Liberal Prime Minister in the twilight of his disastrous career. From groceries to gas to home heating and everything in between, it has all become unaffordable.
Thank you very much, Earl. That's much appreciated. I've had nothing but problems getting this show going today.
On April 1st. How out of touch can you be?
I know a lot of you. I know a lot of you watch Redacted as well as my own show. I hope you had a chance to see my little dissertation yesterday afternoon about Trudeau quitting, because it's amazing how that story was ignored by so many of us on social media. And it really was a story that needed to be shouted from the rooftop. This guy is so unhinged. It really is. Trudeau is unhinged.
Last year, through the Canada Summer Jobs, our Liberal government invested over $285 million in organizations across the country who created over 74,000 youth jobs. I can tell you firsthand the impact that this program is having in my riding of Mississauga Erin Mills, where last year we invested in 57 local organizations and small businesses to create nearly 400 jobs for youth.
No,
I
that's
want to recognize
the
a few
woman
of these
who's
awesome
always crying
organizations who
Islamophobia.
received funding last year in my riding.
I dealt with her about 3-4 years ago when I was doing a story on her and her obsession with Islamophobia. Does she look like your typical Islamic woman? No.
In the community. Thank you to all the recipient organizations.
The hypocrisy is incredible. I have so many Muslim friends who are on side against Justin Trudeau, and I have no time for this Islamophobia.
Questions and
Here we go.
Questions orales, oral questions. The honourable member, the honourable government official opposition whip.
In an act of political cowardice, the NDP and Liberals ignored 70% of Canadians and 7 out of 10 premiers last night, showing Canadians they don't care. They've abandoned the people they were elected to serve by voting to increase the carbon tax by 23% on April 1st. They're forcing families to pay higher prices for gas, groceries, and home heating. This at a time when food banks are shattering records. After 8 years, the Prime Minister isn't worth the cost. If the carbon tax is so popular, why won't he call a carbon tax election so Canadians can decide for themselves?
Where's everybody, Sherry? They've all gone home.
The Minister of Environment and Climate
As I
Change
said
and the
earlier.
Minister of Sport and Physical Activity.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Canada Carbon Rebate is possible because we put a price on pollution, and that's what's driving down the emissions in Canada, Madam Speaker.
It's not
Carbon
driving them
pricing
down.
Is working
That's
in
a lie.
Canada. It is driving down our emissions, and
No,
we're doing that
no,
while
it's not.
sending more money back to 8 out of 10 Canadian families.
Ron,
with the
another
Canada
lie.
Carbon rebate, Madam Speaker. But the Conservatives
They
want
just
to ruin
continue
the
this
rebate. They don't
peddle
want
the
any money
same
to go back to
falsehoods.
Canadian families. It's very clear who they work for. It's not Canadians. It's big oil and gas. Conservative hypocrisy at its finest,
Oh,
Madam
it's big
Speaker.
oil and gas now.
Honourable official opposition whip.
Who have you been working
Well, this
for all your
government
life?
is flailing, and their climate record is failing. In BC, the federally mandated carbon tax will raise $9 billion over 3 years and credit back only $3.5 billion. I know that NDP Liberal math is hard to understand, but that is a $5.5 billion net cost to British Columbians. 70% of Canadians and 7 out of 10 premiers agree. When will the Prime Minister finally admit his carbon tax is just like him, not worth the cost, and let Canadians vote to axe the tax?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I find it shameful that the Conservatives continue to use the affordability crisis and Canadians who are experiencing difficulty financially at home as a wedge against climate policy, Madam Speaker. There simply is not one economist in Canada who has claimed or suggested that pricing carbon is what's driving inflation. In fact, Madam
Ron.
Speaker, over the last couple of years, as the price of pollution has gone up, so have the rebates, and inflation has come down. That's a negative relationship, Madam Speaker. The Canada Carbon Rebate is sending more money back to 8 out of 10 Canadian families. We're addressing climate change and the affordability
That is a
crisis.
lie.
The
They
Honourable official
keep
opposition
repeating their script,
Madam
which is
Speaker,
false.
what is shameful is that last year alone, this government paid consultants $21 billion, and now the RCMP is investigating them all again.
Yeah.
Conservatives voted non-confidence and called for a carbon tax election so that British Columbians could axe the tax. The NDP leader and his member from South Okanagan, West Kootenay, voted to hike the carbon tax and keep this Prime Minister. Over 200,000 people in BC are using the food bank every month. Families are struggling, and the NDP leader and his 12 BC members are all hell-bent on hiking the tax. If he's so confident...
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, I find it incredibly interesting that while Conservatives pretend to care about Canadians, we are actually working to implement legislation and procedures to bring down prices like food, grocery prices, internet fees. And Madam Speaker, all while we're working hard for Canadians, you know what conservative lobbyists are doing? They're creating fake secret lobbying companies to lobby the government while hiding from Canadians that it's the same chief advisors. And what did they lobby for, Madam Speaker? Higher internet costs. The Conservatives should come clean about who they're standing
The Honourable Deputy Opposition House Leader. Madam Speaker, Quebecers are disappointed today. Disappointed there's no election to change this government
I'm
because the
disappointed.
Bloc voted to save this Prime Minister's career.
I was hoping for some action.
The Bloc is bowing down to a Prime Minister who has invaded every area of Quebec jurisdiction, who's doubled the national debt, who has forced 800,000 Quebecers to line up for food banks every month. A vote for the Bloc will cost you. What did the Prime Minister promise the Bloc in order to save the Liberal government? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
Oh, Mr.
Thank
COVID's
you, Madam
here.
Speaker. Yes, indeed, Canadians and Quebecers are struggling to pay the bills. But what we see is that the Conservative government is against the Canada Child Benefit that has reduced child poverty by 40% in my colleagues' riding. They're against dental care, which is helping around 7,000 seniors in my colleagues' riding. So it's surprising that the Conservatives are so hypocritical. They're voting against things like the Canada Child Benefit and dental care. The Honourable
This is the guy that got
Deputy
COVID-19
Opposition
4
House
times
Leader.
and said we should keep getting the vaccine for the rest of our life.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. What's hypocritical on the Liberal side is to talk about big programs and ignore what's happening at food banks and in Quebec families who can't afford their groceries every week because they don't have enough money, because the Liberal inflationary spending has increased the prices of everything. That's Liberal hypocrisy for you, Madam Speaker. And we wonder why the Bloc has decided to save this Liberal government instead of voting for our motion to hold an election over the carbon tax. What is the deal between the Bloc and the Liberals? The Honourable Minister, as I said before, there are thousands of families in my colleagues' riding who've received the Canada Child Benefit. It's about $500 a month on average.
$500,000
poverty
a month
in parents and
no, that's what you're getting.
Kids in every riding. And yet the Conservatives voted against the Canada Child Benefit. The Honourable Member for Laurentides-Labelle. The federal government keeps on saying no to Quebec. This week there were signs of a slight openness to cooperation on immigration, but that only lasted 4 days. The minister just shut the door on cooperation in an interview with Le Devoir. No to the French language requirement for temporary workers, no to letting Quebec choose workers admitted through the International Mobility Program, and no to rapid progress on asylum seekers. Why can't this minister put aside his contempt for more than 4 days? The Honourable...
I'll show you some contempt.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, post-pandemic, we had increased our immigration levels and businesses wouldn't have workers.
I gotta just break in here for a second. I see a lot of you are really upset about this pay raise. And you realize that they're all in this together. It's always that way. When I worked on the Hill, that was the one day of complete unity when they voted to increase their pay. And they're doing it again. I think the whole thing is really incredibly hypocritical, because they always look after themselves first. Here. I'll put the grits on again here. No, it's the blockheads.
In Parliament. The Liberals, supported by the NDP and the silence of the Conservatives, are attacking Quebec's ability to make its own choices. Do they realize how wrong they are if they think Quebecers will put up with this?
Their own choices?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, it's always interesting, and with all due respect to my colleague from the Bloc, what they want is to squabble.
Yeah.
Canada,
there's fewer clowns on Friday.
And the government of Canada, we work closely with the Quebec government on health, on immigration, and even, Madam Speaker, when it comes to childcare. We looked at what Quebec was doing and extended it countrywide. We respect Quebec for its commitment. We will always work with Quebec, Madam Speaker.
Mr. Burnaby.
Corporate greed is rampant at Bell Canada, and the Liberals are pouring money at Bell with no strings attached. Despite massive profits of over $2 billion, Bell keeps slashing jobs in journalism, hurting democracy, and abandoning workers. Bell's CEO slashed 6,000 jobs in the last 8 months and won't even show up to committee to be held accountable to Canadians who subsidize his profits. So when will the Liberals finally stand up for Canadians, rein in corporate greed, and protect journalism jobs in Canada?
The pay raise is not automatic. They have to
Minister of
vote
Innovation, Science
on
and Industry.
Madam Speaker, thank
and
you
it's
for the
always
question
been
from
that
the
way,
honourable
and they
member.
always
First
all
off, I
vote
want to say
together.
our thoughts are with all the employees and their families who are affected by this difficult news. It's a competitive industry landscape, and companies must continually invest and adapt. That being said, let's not forget this company has made over $2 billion in profits and is now cutting thousands of jobs. Clearly, some choices have been made, and our government will stand up to protect workers' rights, and we've shown that through various pieces of legislation in this House, and we'll always do that, Madam Speaker.
Here, here. Member Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Madam Speaker,
Yes,
as
Bob.
Canadians
Very
observe
good point.
Ramadan and Easter this month, many are scrambling to put food on the table. Organizations like Feed Ottawa are working hard to make sure no one is left behind, but it shouldn't be up to them alone. The Conservatives refused to help when they voted against a school food program to feed kids, and the Liberals are way too busy protecting the profits of grocer CEOs. The NDP has been pushing for a national school food program to
Don't
ensure
tell
no
me what the
child goes
NDP
hungry.
has been pushing
Will the
for
Liberals include it
when you're
in
in
the
bed
upcoming
with the
budget?
Liberals.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and
You
Communities.
have no
Thank you, Madam
credibility.
Speaker. The idea is not without merit, and I thank the honourable colleague for raising it here today. What we do focus on, I'm not going to talk about what could or what may or may not be in the budget, but what we do focus on is the well-being of Canadian families. What have we seen in
There'll
recent
be
years?
plenty of spending in the
Massive
budget.
decline
Yeah,
in
we know
poverty
that.
throughout the country, and in particular, child poverty. When Canadians needed their government there during the pandemic, we were there for them, providing all sorts of relief through emergency programs. Where were the Conservatives? On the side of austerity, Madam Speaker. That party was not there for Canadians. They continue to be against Canadians in that vein. We will continue to be there for the country.
Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
After 8 years of this Liberal NDP Prime Minister and his carbon tax scam, Calgary Food Bank usage skyrocketed 50%. Albertans pay $2,900 into this scam and only get $2,000 back. There's a really bad Liberal math joke in there that just doesn't add up. And yesterday, this costly coalition voted to hike the carbon tax 23% on April the 1st. Why is their obsession with the carbon tax more important than the 70% of Canadians who are telling them to spike the hike so they can feed their families?
That's a good question, Bob. And
L'honorable ministre.
but it's the same.
Speaker, the fact of the matter is,
Why
that
does this?
Albertans
Why does
have
this
$700
jackass
more in
even
their
get to
pockets
stand up
every
and
year
answer
because of the
questions
Canada
when
carbon
he's got
rebate?
absolutely nothing to offer?
$700, Madam
Conflict of
Speaker.
interest?
And Madam
Justin
Speaker,
Trudeau has
what
exhibited
is
conflict of
important to note
interest
is
since the
that
day he
forest
became
fires,
Prime Minister,
floods,
and
smoke,
he evades any
I'll
responsibility.
get the Minister to restart his question, just like I did a while ago with someone else.
Oh, we get to
who,
hear Randy again.
On that
You're
side.
lucky.
I
Lucky
want to
you.
remind members to please hold off on anything that they have to say unless they're being recognized. The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, the truth of the matter is that Albertans get $700 a year more through the Canada carbon rebate. It's one of the highest amounts that anybody in the country gets back. Madam Speaker, Albertans want us to fight climate change. That's exactly what we're doing. We had forest fires, we've had floods, we've had wildfires. Madam Speaker, our residents of Alberta want us to fight climate change. What they don't want is the Conservatives to ruin the rebate.
For Calgary
Ruin the
That
rebate.
minister from Alberta should be ashamed of himself.
Shove your
He's
rebate.
constantly ramming this Prime Minister's woke ideology down the throats of Albertans when he should be the voice of Alberta at the cabinet table. Why doesn't he stand with the majority of Albertans
Good
that
for
say
you.
axe the tax and scrap this scam instead of standing with this corrupt Prime Minister? Just a simple question for him. Does he have his job references lined up? Because after the next election, him and this carbon tax scam will be gone.
Good. Oh, I'd love to see that skinhead gone.
Speaker, I'm glad to see that we've reached such a level of collegiality in this House that somehow the Conservatives think they can threaten my job with what residents in Alberta want, which is us to fight climate change. Madam Speaker, where was that person when there were floods in Calgary, when there were forest fires burning Fort McMurray? These people think it's a joke. It's not woke. They need to wake
arson's
up.
not a
Climate
joke,
change is
but
real.
you are.
$700 more in the pockets of Albertans. That is real change. That's the Canada Carbon Rebate.
Oh, you what a
The honourable member Barrie Springwater Oromadonte.
Speaker, yesterday the NDP Liberal government voted to increase the carbon tax by 23%, making the cost of gas, groceries, and home heating more expensive. In my community, in January alone, the Barrie Food Bank saw over 7,000 individuals in need of food assistance, and they provided 540 emergency food items for individuals experiencing homelessness. This year, 1 million more Canadians than last year will be forced to go to food banks, but the Prime Minister plans to quadruple this costly carbon tax anyway. Why is he ignoring 70% of Canadians and the 7 premiers who want to axe the tax?
Good question. Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The affordability crisis that Canadians are feeling is real, and we need to have real solutions for it, like the Canada Carbon Rebate, which sends more money back to 8 out of 10 Canadian families. But for the Conservatives to use the words of food banks and food rescue organizations, food security organizations, and poverty experts continually in this House, none of those experts, none of those economists or those charities suggest that ditching our environmental plan and axing the tax would help.
You ever read anything except your own talking points?
Say that, Madam Speaker. So if the Conservatives want
Nothing
to
but
continue to use
air
the
in
words
this
of the
guy's
food
head.
banks, they ought to read the reports.
The honourable member for Barrie Springwater Oromadonte.
You're a fool.
Thank you, Speaker. I have the numbers right here from the province of Ontario, where the member opposite and I both live. In the province of Ontario, the average family pays $1,674 and receives a rebate of $1,047. That leaves them $627 they're paying extra. Those facts just aren't accurate. After 8 years, farmers in my community are struggling, and they know that the Prime Minister and his carbon tax coalition are not worth the cost. A poultry farmer in my riding's gas bill is almost $10,000 a month, with a third of that being the carbon tax. This will only get worse when the Prime Minister increases his carbon tax by 23% on April 1st.
Reports from 2 years
If the Prime
ago.
Minister refuses to axe the tax, why won't he let Canadians...
No, Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, what the parliamentary budget officer said is that he's distressed with the selective use of facts from these reports. What he said very clearly yesterday was that the consensus of economists is that carbon taxes are the least interruptive way to reduce emissions. He added, it is true that the carbon tax is often seen by many economists as the least disruptive and probably the most cost-effective way of reaching certain levels of carbon emissions. The PBO report deserves better than these Conservatives using selective numbers to try to peddle their climate change denial narrative.
The honourable member Yorkton Melville.
Thank you, Speaker. This NDP Liberal government voted to increase the carbon tax by 23%, making the cost of groceries, gas, and home heating even more expensive. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost, as he will raise the carbon tax to $2,618 in Saskatchewan. Why are they ignoring 70% of Canadians and 7 of our best premiers who want to axe the tax?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, once again, Conservatives stand in this place and talk about affordability measures. Meanwhile, their own chief lobbyist for the leader of the official opposition is also lobbying on behalf of big grocers to not sign
Well, this is her
our
favorite
code of
axe to
conduct,
grind
Madam
now.
Speaker. We are working every day to bring in affordability measures to Canadians. While Conservatives talk a good talk, behind the scenes, they're there to help their wealthy, connected insider friends.
She just escaped from an episode of Friends.
Madam Speaker, last year alone, the Prime Minister paid consultants $21 billion, and now the RCMP has multiple investigations into these Liberal contracts. On the carbon tax, I would love nothing more than to watch this member face to face with the good people of Yorkton Melville and try to explain to them why they are paying $525 more in carbon taxes after the rebate this year. Why do they continue to ignore 70% of Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I'm glad the member opposite brought up the use of consultants because what happened the day after the 8th leader of the Conservative Party, the current leader of the official opposition, came into power? The very next day, their chief strategist created a secret lobbying company. That lobbying company then produced, they're yelling, it's so secret we found out about it, Madam Speaker, not part of...
You do that all yourself?
Again, I'll get the honourable member to restart. I would ask members
Oh, no,
to please hold
don't
on
ask
any
her to
comments
restart.
or questions they have until they are being recognized. Order. The honourable
The
parliamentary secretary.
from Friends found that out
Madam
all
Speaker,
by
I'll
herself.
repeat, the Conservatives heckle out so secret we found out about it. Yeah, not
Good
to
grief,
their
Jennifer.
surprise.
You did it all
Canadians now
yourself?
know exactly what they're doing behind the scenes. They say one thing to Canadians, which is that they're going to stand up for them. But Madam Speaker, what they actually do is they set up secret companies to lobby for higher prices against Canadians' interests. Madam Speaker, you can't trust Conservatives because they're not in it for Canadians.
Wow, what a powerful speaker.
Honourable member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères.
Joke.
Madam Speaker,
Terrible joke.
not only are the feds meddling in Quebec's
Well, you don't
affairs,
see this
they
guy
now
up
seem
very
to
often.
want to meddle in municipal affairs. They just can't help themselves. Our cities are
Not very
concerned
often,
that the gas tax program, which expired in December, will be renewed, but with new strings attached. But it's simple. All they're asking for is that the program be renewed as is. Municipalities know what their residents need, and the program works. So is the government going to renew the Canada Community Building Fund without any additional conditions? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our government has been crystal clear on this issue, and our record is also very clear. It speaks for itself. The relations between the federal government and municipalities is very strong.
We will continue to engage with municipalities on infrastructure matters and related matters. I'm happy to discuss with that member further the specifics of his concern, but we see throughout the country that infrastructure support on a range of matters has been supported in record ways by this government, and that will continue.
The honourable member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères. If the federal government wants to prioritize housing, that's fine. Invest in housing programs, but they shouldn't put the money from the gas tax program that goes to the municipalities, that shouldn't be diverted into housing. This program is the program that works best for municipalities. But taking the money from one and giving to the other would be like robbing Peter to pay Paul. This is
that's what
not
the federal government does all the
for
time.
the federal government to
rebate is all
wade
about.
in with this bad idea.
You don't
of
get as much
imposing
back as they
new
take.
Conditions on with the gas tax program. The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm very happy to hear talk of cooperation and housing. That's precisely what we are doing with a $1.8 billion deal to support housing projects in Quebec. In fact, Madam Speaker, it's the largest lump sum investment in housing in all of Quebec's history. And that's why I'm so proud of the result. We know there's still more and work to be done and more successes to be had in the months to come.
NDP Liberal government is about to raise the carbon tax by 23% on gas, groceries, and home heating, proving that after 8 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Per capita GDP is falling and prices are rising. That means Canadians are getting poorer while life gets more expensive. Only Conservatives have the courage to face Canadians in a carbon tax election. But if they won't call an election, will they at least listen to 7 premiers and 70% of Canadians?
No, they are so tied up in ideological rope on this. They will not listen.
It's clear now why the Conservatives and Premier Daniel Smith are on this bumper sticker campaign. It's because Premier Daniel Smith is increasing the price of gas in Alberta by their full 13 cents on April 1st through their provincial tax. They just want to scapegoat the price on pollution for their own decisions. Madam Speaker, in this case, I actually agree with Chris Sims, the Alberta director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, who said it's easy to throw your shoes at the federal government while cranking up your own fuel tax on the same day. Not good, Madam Speaker. Not good. Conservative hypocrisy at its finest.
The
Madam Speaker, Liberals are engaging in an orchestrated disinformation campaign to defend their destructive carbon tax. The report of the independent parliamentary budget officer says plainly on page 4, quote, taking into consideration both the fiscal and economic impacts, we estimate that most households will see a net loss, unquote. In response, Liberals have deliberately excluded the PBO's economic impacts to artificially inflate their numbers. When will this Prime Minister end this blatant deception and finally axe the tax?
This argument is just so incredibly stupid.
Madam Speaker, that member from Edmonton is just here to do Premier Danielle Smith's work so that she can cover up her 13-cent.
How stupid do you have to be to not understand that you're getting screwed by the federal government with this carbon tax, and they're not giving you back anything near what they take? How stupid do they think we are?
The narrative that gas is expensive because of price on pollution. You know what that 13-cent price hike on April 1st doesn't include? A rebate. The Canada carbon rebate rebates every single dollar of the Canada price on pollution back to consumers. That 13
This moron found something that's happening.
Honourable member for Edmonton, Wetaskiwin. And I want to remind members to please keep the tone down.
Madam Speaker, you'll notice that that member did not even try to answer my question. On page 3, the independent PBO states, quote, we incorporate estimates of the economic impact from the federal fuel charge into our calculation of net cost to provide a more complete picture of the overall impact on households. Taking into account that economic impact, the carbon tax clearly makes families in every province worse off. In Alberta next year, the report says that families will pay almost $1,000 more than they get back in rebates at a time when it costs more than ever for even the basics of life. How can any Alberta Liberal or NDP MP support this 23% tax increase?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, what the PBO and the Auditor General said very clearly is that they're distressed with the selective use of facts from that report, Madam Speaker. And what they also said is that the economic cost is important to look at because there is a price to climate change. Climate change cost the Canadian economy over $2 billion last year, and it's likely that it's going to cost more this year because of wildfires adjacent to that member's riding. Madam Speaker, it's atrocious that the Conservatives stand in this House and misuse the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report. What he said very clearly is the consensus of economists is that carbon taxes are the least interruptive way to reduce emissions, and that rebate sends 8 out of 10 families more money.
The honourable member for Beauce. Madam Speaker, today is the last day for the Prime Minister to backtrack on his April Fool's joke, the carbon tax hike. Canadians are struggling, but the Bloc wants to radically increase the carbon tax, which will drive gas prices up by 20 cents a litre and have a huge impact on food prices. The Bloc is propping the Prime Minister up after he broke our immigration system, raised taxes, and doubled the national debt. What did the Prime Minister offer the Bloc in order to keep his government in power? The Honourable Minister. Madam Speaker, the price on carbon puts more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 families. And that's because the revenues from the carbon tax are returned to Canadians. And that's why middle and lower class families are getting more money in their pockets than the carbon price is taking out of them. What the Conservatives want to do is reward the big polluters and at the expense of the middle class and those working hard.
When are these half-wits going to get it?
They will
the
bear
carbon
the
is
brunt
not
of
a
the climate
pollution.
crisis.
They keep repeating it over and over again. We might actually start to believe it, but I won't.
Emergency. A youth climate corps would do just that, all while creating good paying jobs. The Conservatives, well, they have no climate plan, no plan to protect young people's future. The United States are already doing this, but because the Liberals are dragging their feet, Canada is being left behind. Will the Liberal government stop letting young people down and create a youth climate corps?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I was proud to join the call with my colleague from Victoria, as well as the leader of the Green Party, to meet with youth across the country who are interested in fighting climate change, Madam Speaker. Notably, no Conservative joined that call with these youth. But it is important to recognize, Madam Speaker, that kids across this country are concerned about the impact that we're having on our natural environment. So we're employing more of them through the Canada Parks and Recreation Association's Green Jobs Program, through Canada Summer Jobs, and through the Minister of the Environment Environment and Climate Change is Youth Advisory Committee. Madam Speaker, we've got to do more to listen to youth. We've got 2 weeks back home, and I hope everybody will do a school visit. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
Joe Biden has created a clean energy economy with 100,000 new jobs while this Liberal government continues to stumble. We're just days away from the shutdown of the mineral exploration tax credit program. You can't build a 21st century economy without metals, and those metals have to be found. So is this government going to outsource metal production to China or the horrific human rights abuses in Congo? Or will they support exploration in Canada, where we insist on good wages, Indigenous consent, and strong environmental standards?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Resources.
The honour for raising the question. Our government and the Canadian population, we've created 40,000 new jobs in February. As the member mentioned, the mineral exploration tax credit is important to support exploration companies, junior companies. We as a government, for the first time in 2017, extended the mineral tax exploration credit for 5 years to provide certainty to the industry. We are working with the industry right now. We're not going to, looking at the budget coming shortly, but we're going to make sure that we support our critical minerals, we support the mining industry, and we support mineral exploration.
Well, Charlie Angus appealing
for Winnipeg South Centre.
to Joe Biden's
Madam
work.
Speaker, Africa is home to 5 of the top 10 fastest growing economies in the world. I'm proud of our government's investments to help businesses in my riding and across Canada reach new markets, including Africa. Earlier this year, the Canada-Africa Chamber of Business hosted the second Canada-Africa Business Conference in Kenya. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade update this House on his recent attendance at the conference, the opportunities for the Canadian and African businesses to grow, and what that means for businesses in my riding of Winnipeg South Centre? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, the Canada-Africa Business Conference reaffirmed the incredible value of export diversification and growing trade across Africa for Canadian businesses. It was a great success, which I know will help in collaboration and growing our industries. While in Nairobi, I got to see firsthand why Canada is recognized among the leading aerospace industries in the world. Let's continue to build on this momentum and enhance our trade ties with Africa. As we know, this creates good paying jobs right here and across the continent of Africa. Thank you to the member for Winnipeg South Centre for his leadership in helping to grow trade and our economy. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Caribou Prince George.
Madam Speaker, yesterday the blocking NDP shamefully voted to save the Prime Minister from a carbon tax election. Instead, they voted in favor of a 23% tax hike on Canadians just 10 days from now. That's no April Fool's. And let's be clear, that vote wasn't about saving the environment, it was about saving their pension. After 8 years of this Liberal NDP government, Canadians are struggling more than ever. More Canadians at food banks, more mental health crisis. Will the Prime Minister stop ignoring 70% of Canadians and 7 out of 10 premiers and axe his tax? That's right.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry.
Well, Madam Speaker, I wish we could put a price on the methane coming out of the Conservative Party these days. Let's talk about hypocrisy. While our government is working hard to implement real solutions on the affordability challenges, Conservatives oppose and obstruct every step of the way. The leader of the opposition, we find out, is being advised by Jenny Byrne, who also lobbies for Loblaws. And the day after he won his leadership campaign, with her help, she set up a shell company to start lobbying.
Oh, here's this one, this story again.
And what we learn now is that Jenny Byrne's senior VP.
This is an interesting comment here from Autumn. Christian. That's worth looking into. Of course. Does it sound hard to believe? No.
Groceries and home heating even more expensive. This will cost the average Albertans an extra $911 per year. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Why is he still ignoring
Thank you, George. You have a good day and a good weekend, too. And we'll see you. Well, hopefully you'll be watching my broadcast, but we'll be back to question period in 2 weeks.
So not only is Jenny Byrne lobbying for Loblaws and advising the leader of the opposition, she attends Conservative Party caucus meetings every week, and she set up a shell company to lobby, and her senior VP is lobbying the very office that she advises. Now, if that's not double dipping, I'm not sure what is. I don't think, and I think all Canadians deserve some answers here, but let's stop the pretending. Whose corner are the Conservatives actually in?
Good question. The honourable member for Souris Moose Mountain.
Well, maybe someone will try and answer a question for a change. Madam Speaker, seeding is fast approaching. Farmers are busy preparing equipment, seeders and trucks, purchasing fuel, fertilizer, seed, arranging families, workers, and their financing. And their situation has never been more desperate. The carbon tax has escalated their fears, and now with a 23% increase as of April 1st, it has only made their stress greater. With his inflationary spending, this Prime Minister and his NDP Liberal government is not worth the cost. Will this government spike the hike and axe the tax?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture.
And I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. The only party stalling 234 is their party. They keep putting up speakers. But speaking of farmers, farmers need to rely on business risk management programs. We're the only party who've increased business risk management programs and their budgets by 25%, while the other side cut their budgets.
The Honourable for Peace River Westland.
Speaker, after 8 years, we know that this Liberal NDP government is just not worth the cost. And now on April 1st, the carbon tax is going up by 23%. We know that the Liberal NDP carbon tax scam only makes Canadians
It's a
poor.
scam.
We also know that if you tax the farmer who grows the food and tax the truck driver who brings the food to the store and you tax the store that sells the food, Canadians can't afford food. When will the Liberal government see the facts and axe the tax?
When hell freezes over.
The Honourable Minister.
When will this Member of Parliament and the climate dinosaurs on that side of the House wake up to the fact that the planet is burning? He is from Northern Alberta. He knows what impact the forest fires in McMurray had. He knows the impact of floods in Calgary. Madam Speaker, Canada Carbon Rebate is responsible for reducing our emissions by 25%. Albertans in his area get more money than other Albertans because of the rural top-up. What they are trying to peddle to Albertans is shameful. 13% gas tax hike from the Premier, and they're on us. What a shame.
You are the shame.
The Honourable Member for Terrebonne.
Get back to your writing, because you won't be coming out to Ottawa much longer.
Penalty fee repayment of CEBA loans threatened the survival of our small businesses. We did everything we could to warn the government, but now it's reaping what it sowed. The Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy reveals that in January, the number of insolvency rose by 129%. January 2024 was the worst month in the office's 40-year history. We're in the middle of a wave of bankruptcies due to this visionless government. What is it going to do today to stop the bleeding?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The CEBA program supported over 900,000 small businesses through the pandemic, and we estimate 80% of them have repaid their loans so far. As we move away from the pandemic, we're taking serious, concrete action to support small businesses, both by providing funding and by cutting costs, Madam Speaker. We recently finalized agreements to cut credit card fees by up to 27%, which will save small businesses across Canada $1 billion, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Terrebonne. Let's talk figures. Already for last year, Equifax recorded a 44% increase in business bankruptcies. Based on January 2024 data, it'll be worse this year. No one in this House should find this situation acceptable. The government needs to be flexible with businesses. It must talk to them directly and study their files on a case-by-case basis. It can't continue to do nothing while businesses continue to close their doors. When will they finally open their eyes and take responsibility for preventing bankruptcies? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the opportunity to speak on this issue. As we move forward from the pandemic, small businesses have nearly 3 years until the end of 2026 to repay their CEBA loans, and they have access to as low as 5% interest rate. Meanwhile, we are investing in communities to strengthen our economy. Earlier this month, we announced $2.5 million in federal funding to enhance the Indigenous Women's Entrepreneur Program and create an Indigenous Youth Entrepreneurship Program. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Yeah, that's a good point, Donna.
The Honourable Member for
They were caused by arson, not climate change.
In 8
yeah,
years,
the Conservatives
this
need
Liberal
to
government has
say
succeeded
that
in
more
breaking
often.
our immigration system,
No
destroying our
question.
economy and doubling our national debt. Food has gotten very expensive, but what's even more expensive is voting bloc. Taxes are being taxed. The bloc can cut tax, but it doesn't want to. What did this Prime Minister promise the bloc to get their unconditional support? The Honourable Minister. Madam Speaker, once again, we've heard the Conservative Party is the party of hope and inaction in this chamber, and they're talking about working with Quebecers, and we are talking about working with Quebecers and Canadians to make life more accessible, to increase jobs, to support unions. Madam Speaker, we're here to take action and to help Quebecers and Canadians, but they are only going to look for quarrels. The Honourable Member for Montmagny. People are desperate, Madam Speaker. After 8 years of this Liberal government, the Bloc is still doing everything it can to keep the PM in power. The same Prime Minister who has destroyed our economy, that people across the country are now unable to meet their basic needs.
I love this one. These people.
While Canadians are having a hard time feeding themselves, they keep raising taxes. Can the Prime Minister tell us the terms of his contract with the Bloc to save his career? The Honourable Minister. Madam Speaker, the first thing we did when we came to power was to reduce taxes on the middle class. The first thing that the Conservatives did was to vote against that. We also set up the CCB, and they voted against that. Now, if my honourable colleague would like to know more about his riding, I would ask him to visit over 3,000 housing projects in Montmagny, Villa-Rosevin, amongst others. They were created in his riding. There have been some dozen low rent projects, and even though they only created 6.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister was ordered by Parliament to turn over the Arrive scam receipts and to come up with a plan to get taxpayers their money back.
Yet
what
this
the Prime
question
Minister tabled this week is nothing more than a whitewash. We still don't have the receipts, and they don't have a plan to get taxpayers their money back. So just a number, how much money did these Liberals award fraudsters and scammers? And when will taxpayers get a refund?
Trudeau's walking away from this scandal too.
Speaker, as I've said before in this place, we take these allegations extremely seriously.
No, you don't.
We expect all contractors in the procurement process and all rules to be followed. Anyone who doesn't follow those rules will come with consequences. CBSA has already put in place several measures to improve the procurement process. There have been announcements made as well with the Minister of Procurement to ensure that the procurement process throughout government is transparent, accountable, and that questionable issues like this don't happen again.
The Honourable Member for Sudbury.
Speaker, in a world where global cooperation and support for the most vulnerable are more critical than ever, the Leader of the Opposition has proposed cuts to what he calls wasteful foreign aid. Can the Minister clarify the impact
is this
of
the
these
Ukraine
cuts on
question?
Canada's security, as well as on our standing as a moral leader globally?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, the Leader of the Official Opposition's proposed cuts threaten to undermine our global role in peace and security and stability, as well as undermine the peace and safety and security of Canadians. Cutting programs like demining and helping conflict-affected children risks our global reputation.
As long as it's gender
these proposed
demining,
cuts would
right,
signal
Ahmed?
a retreat from global leadership at a time when global challenges actually demand
Gender
that we do
equity
more, and that
demining.
we collaborate with other nations. And if he's willing to make these dangerous cuts that threaten the peace and security of Canadians, what else is he going to cut? He's simply not worth the risk.
They should have cut you a long time ago because you were the idiot immigration minister who had an open border in the Quebec, New York.
Official Opposition Deputy
I'll take
Leader?
it, Madam Speaker. 5 years. When is this government going to list the IRGC as the terrorists that they are?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, we obviously recognize and condemn the Iranian government as a state sponsor of terrorism. We have implemented several measures to ban some members of the IRGC or the members of the IRGC to enter Canada. We have put in place sanctions. Madam Speaker, we will take the advice from our national security advisors and officials who make these recommendations. But Madam Speaker, we will do everything to keep Canadians safe.
So they said last year they were working on it. Yesterday, the minister changed the story, saying that his agencies didn't even give him that advice. Today, I don't understand that answer, and neither will Canadians. So which answer is it?
Exactly.
Which story? We've got a minister over there who won't condemn the most vile anti-Semitism, another minister who held hands with a literal terrorist. Is there no courage at all again? I'm going to ask one more time. What day will you list the IRGC as the terrorists that they are in this country?
As long as they can suck a vote
Well, she
from
needs to
someplace,
address
the
all
Liberals
questions
will
and
not
comments
do
through
it.
the chair and not directly to the members. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I said before, that we do condemn and
said nothing
acknowledge
before.
that the Iranian government is a state sponsor of terrorism,
how she
that we
struggles?
have put in place sanctions, robust sanctions. We've used the immigration
Hard.
legislation to ban people from visiting Canada. Madam Speaker, we will continue to listen to the advice of security services, but make no mistake, we recognize the IRGC as a state sponsor of terrorism,
can you get the
and we
name
will do
right?
everything to keep Canadians safe.
You don't even
The
know what you're
honourable member
talking
for Calgary Heritage.
I haven't
While the
seen
clerical
that one
regime
before.
brutalizes women in Iran, they export terror abroad. Russia and
I haven't
Ukraine,
seen that
Houthis in
question
Yemen,
before.
Hamas, Hezbollah, Iraqi militia. This week, victims of Hamas atrocities shared their stories.
What an
Like the
atrocity.
PS752 victims, they are calling on the government to list the IRGC as a terror organization. It's been 5 years. What day? When will these NDP Liberals stand up for victims and list the IRGC?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, as I've said,
I'm still
we
not
are
ready
listening
for
to
the
Canadians
question,
and we
Madam
take this
Speaker.
matter very seriously. This is precisely why,
Seriously.
as I've said in my earlier answers, we have put in place robust sanctions against the IRGC. We recognize Iran as a state sponsor of terrorism. We are using the immigration legislation
what
to
a
ensure that there is a
pathetic
ban from
minister,
entering
or
Canada. Madam Speaker, we will
Parliamentary
continue to
Secretary,
listen to the
excuse me.
advice of
God,
security
she's
services
not a minister
because we
yet.
will do everything in our power to keep Canadians safe.
Yeah, it's good. Oh,
The
just maybe next
Honourable
time.
member for Fleetwood Port Kills.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Canadians expect their governments to take action on climate change and address affordability issues. Putting a price on carbon while sending rebates to Canadians is the most cost-effective way to fight climate change.
Nice. You're reading that script
Affordability
very
is
well,
front and center
Kenny.
in this system, which puts more money into the bank accounts of Canadian families.
Did you read it
Can
before?
the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change share with this House how the Canada Carbon Rebate helps
Kenny,
Canadians?
I'm so glad you asked that great
Thank you,
question.
Madam
Ken.
Speaker. The Canada Carbon Rebate is made possible because we put a price on pollution to lower our emissions and fight climate change. But affordability is front and center in this system, which literally puts more money back into the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadian families.
It's just
Madam
like
Speaker,
Justin's
Conservatives
there.
offer
They
no
all-
solutions and
they
continue
all
to
read
spread
from the same
misinformation
script and talking
about climate
points.
change to Canadians. They want to cut the Canada Carbon Rebate payments that are helping Canadians during these challenging times, and instead they want to help their friends in big industry continue to pollute freely. Madam Speaker, it's clear that the Conservatives don't care about fighting climate change. They want to raise our emissions in Canada, and they and they do not care about our children's
1984 in
future.
the House
Madam
of
Speaker,
Commons.
it's a shame.
Question
The honourable
period.
member
It's
for
1984.
Bulkley Valley.
It's news
Madam
speak.
Speaker,
and it's
yesterday
crap.
I asked the Environment Minister if he would commit to doing what it takes to ensure that weather stations on the BC
Mike,
coast
I'm sick of all
remain
the
up
lies,
and running
dude.
this coming winter.
It's difficult
These
to listen to
stations,
this.
like the Holland Rock Weather Station near Prince
Maybe
Rupert,
2 weeks
provide
is a nice
critical,
break from
life-saving
question.
information for mariners. And the Holland Rock Station hasn't been working since early January. In his response, the minister said he'll do what he can, but that he's not the finance minister. So to the finance minister, will she ensure that Environment Canada has the resources they need to keep these critical, life-saving weather stations up and running all winter?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm glad that my colleague opposite is raising this important issue. It offers me an opportunity to highlight the announcement that we made last week for 32 new state-of-the-art radar stations right across this country. That'll add to the safety of Canadians. It'll provide more reliable weather information in advance of extreme weather. And in the face of climate change, Madam Speaker, unfortunately, these events are likely to happen more and more.
They're all
I appreciate the
trained
highlight from
seals.
the honourable member from the NDP, and I'll work together with his office to ensure that weather
I don't know
station
how they
is
can-
up and running in
They
due
can
course.
look at
Thank you, Madam
themselves
Speaker.
in the mirror every morning.
Fort York.
Madam
Because they're
Speaker,
just
a farmer care deal by the governing coalition makes Canadians again wait for
It's
the smoke and mirrors
just
to clear.
the
They've seen a
epitome of
dented dental deal that
hypocrisy
leaves out
and
the
lack
middle
of
class and makes
integrity.
seniors wait to age 87. They've seen numerous carbon tax grabs rake in billions, but do little for the environment. And they've seen a childcare strategy eliminate 100,000 spaces. Finally, they've seen a cannabis policy that's actually grown a huge black market. Madam Speaker, Canadians aren't fooled by the half schemes of the Liberal government and their NDP buttress. The Emperor has no clothes. Madam Speaker, when will he take his walk on the beach?
On the beach.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much. I remember not too long ago that member was begging to be a member of the Liberal caucus. Didn't really work out for him. He's now auditioning to join the other side, and he can. He'll find a place over there where they want to cut childcare, cut dental care, cut pharmacare. A few weeks ago, when this government tabled pharmacare legislation, the leader of the opposition ran away from reporters at a press conference when they asked him about pharmacare. That party does not care about the middle class. They don't care about the vulnerable. We're going to do all these things that Canadians require to ensure success.
Is incredible. Who runs away from
Brings us
the
to the
media?
end of question period. I do want to ask members, wish members a great time in their riding.
Yeah. Well, that's it for 2 weeks, folks. Thanks for tuning in today. Once again, we had a few technical glitches at the beginning, but we got to the end. I will be broadcasting as usual over the weekend and throughout next week. Please keep watching Krayden's Right. Stand on guard. Like the station. Subscribe if you haven't. Visit our store and get one of our t-shirts. I got one right here. Here. Think while it's still legal, because that's one of the things we're fighting here is the Online Harms Act, which is the worst piece of censorship nonsense, the worst censorship bill in the world, at least in a democratic nation, or supposedly democratic nation. So we'll be continuing to talk about that next week. Just because question period is not meeting, just because the House isn't sitting, that doesn't mean the government isn't continuing to make our lives more difficult and to go after our democratic freedoms, to destroy our liberty, because that's what the Trudeau government does every day of the week, every day of the year. Whether or not the House is sitting or not, we will continue to fight. We need to fight back. I remind you from a great line from one of my favorite films, could be my favorite film, Casablanca, where Victor Laszlo is asked, why do you keep fighting? He says, you might as well ask why we continue to breathe. If we continue to breathe, we die. If we stop fighting, the world will die. And we're fighting for this country right now. Thanks for supporting us. Subscribe if you haven't already. Like us, ring the bell, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.